Good afternoon, Frank. Another week has passed.
Yes, it has, Brian,
And
successfully.
everything seems to accelerate. More things happen, they happen faster, and in more and more different parts of the world. And whether they're getting more and more interconnected or not is sometimes difficult to see.
Hmm.
But what is clear is that everything that starts off local becomes global. And it seems that the situation in Syria is being gradually taken over by international interests, and looks as though we're on the verge of some sort of collaboration at an international level that might possibly lead to at least the next stage of the process in Syria.
Looks that way. It certainly does.
Uh,
I would just like to also note that last evening in Madison Square Garden in New York, there was a concert to collect aid for Hurricane Sandy victims. It was like a who's who of the rock and roll pantheon of well-known rock and rollers. 2 billion people watched the concert worldwide. How many people are in the world?
7?
Well, that's like one over, not, it's greater than 25% if the promoters could be believed. And I think that's pretty remarkable.
And,
We're
and,
talking,
and I didn't even know about it. So how did 2 billion people find out?
well, I think that's because of exactly what we're going to discuss today. It's the means of horizontal communication that goes on through the web and through these cloud-based social media technologies.
Well, that is really amazing. Uh,
It's an amazing statistic. I couldn't believe it. And they kept mentioning 2 billion, 2 billion. And I checked in the papers today, and that was also mentioned as well.
and well, I'd like to see more details about how it was being watched in various parts of the world.
I think it was, they claimed it was being televised on 140 stations worldwide, 140 channels. And
Uh-huh.
it was also being streamed live on the internet and was being streamed live on Facebook.
So I wonder how much of that was television that was directly fed to people who would be watching television anyway, and how much of it was actually selected by people who have a screen and it's up to them what they should put on the screen.
That would be a good question. That'd be a good answer to find. I'll look for that.
But it's also interesting that that sort of music should have such an appeal.
Hmm.
Presumably, in this case, it wasn't so much Sandy that was the attraction as the music, but
Oh, absolutely.
but
Okay.
uh, but it's also possible that anything that happens in America interests a large number of people, and Sandy might have attracted attention for that reason.
It's possible, but I couldn't help but thinking that if this many people would tune in for a rock and roll concert, I mean, what would ever happen if there was something really serious, right, that required the attention of everybody in the world? I think you could get a good 70 or 80% of the 7 billion people in the world to pay attention to something. I think it's possible. And they could all watch simultaneously.
Well, that sounds really like something that's presaging the future developments that have come to my attention in the last few days, which is that we're on the verge of a new stage of interconnectedness, which would be global, which mean in the sense that the gradual increase in interconnectedness, which started with the introduction of the PC in 1980, is now leading to a situation in which internet connection is going to be thought of more as a utility, like a connection to electricity, than as an individual choice and an individual need or requirement.
I think you're exactly correct. And
Uh,
a long time ago, in fact, I wrote a paper in one of your classes about internet connectivity rates in Afghanistan. And since that time, it definitely has turned more into something akin to electricity, or whether water is provided, things of that nature, whether or not the real estate listings include internet availability. That's right up there with gas and electricity.
And if things have already been happening that I think haven't received enough attention, the idea that you can provide an internet umbrella for a whole city. And I understand there is one city in Tennessee that has actually done this. And there have been the beginnings of that sort of effort to do that sort of thing in California, but not hasn't arrived anywhere yet, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And there was talk about doing it in Philadelphia, actually, but then that somehow aborted. I'm not sure what happened to it. So it's not as though it's not been thought of before. To some extent, making internet connection generally available to the public in a particular area. But the possibility of it becoming generally available, perhaps even by satellite or some sort of satellite facilitated technology, would really change things.
Well, I think that if anybody watches this digital recording 5 years from now, they're going to chuckle. They're going to say, "Can you believe these two guys were talking about this?" I think it's definitely going to happen. I mean, even as it stands now, when I travel to London using my iPhone, of course I can connect over the AT&T network, which I think is the O2 network over there.
Yeah.
It costs a fortune. So what I do is I switch it to, I turn the roaming off and I switch to VPNs.
Yeah.
All right. And you can walk around London and you can walk 60 feet to another 60 feet to another 60 feet and keep walking into various different networks.
Yeah.
And more than 3/4 of them are open. They don't require any passwords.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's in a big urban environment, of course, but in suburban environments and in rural environments, it's going to be something akin to what Franklin Roosevelt did with the Rural Electrification Act. I mean, this is a necessity. It has to be there.
And it's not as though it's just one movement towards the next stage. There's several things going on that all lead in the same direction. There's an acceleration in process that you may know more about than I do of access to payments on the web that will completely change the way that credit card payments are processed. I think there's more than one movement to do this, one called V.me and another called Square. And then there's this Simple, this other process called Simple, which is going to greatly accelerate banking on the web. So there are many different things. And then in other parts of the world, there have been, even in Iran, in the face of all these sanctions, which cut it off from so much interconnectedness, there's been a tremendous move ahead in the national integration of the society, which is now over 70 million people and quite a large territory. I'm not sure what state it would compare with here, but it's certainly 1,000 miles from one end to the other, at least. And of course, a lot of it is desert and uninhabited, and yet there is a national system of both for cell phone connection and for access to electricity and that sort of thing in the most isolated communities.
Well, I'm wondering where this is going to go, because I think wherever it's going to go, it's going to happen very, very quickly. It's going to be a different scale of time, a different scale of change than what we're used to. And I mean, we as older people, I mean, the fact of the matter is that 15 or 20 years ago, email was relatively unknown, if it existed at all. And some of the concepts that we're talking about now weren't even conceived of then. Nobody would have believed it. I mean, it's almost as if those Mike Wallace shows, the 20th century, talking about the promise of science, it's almost as if they're all coming at the same time, back when soon, someday in the future, you'll be able to access a whole library from your house on a computer screen. And everybody, oh, that never happened. I mean, you began to watch those Mike Wallace shows in the 1960s on CBS, and they still didn't happen in the 70s. They didn't happen until the, and then now, in the 2010s, I mean, it's like a deluge. It's a tidal wave of information. It's like, wow. I mean, it's like Mike Wallace on steroids coming in with all the things that have been promised. I mean, there's even talk now of delivering genetically programmed electronic wafers through the internet, so people can take them as therapeutic medicine to control diseases. And there's three-dimensional engineering where
Yes.
people are able to design things on the internet and produce them and then actually sell them, and they can fulfill functions that are non-manufacturing oriented or non-manufacturing based. So I guess what I'm saying is I see, and you've always said this, and I've always sort of chuckled after we gotten off, but you've always said that the day will come when national boundaries and national sovereignty will begin to matter less and less. But I have to agree with you. I
And
think it's
I think
coming.
there are uh, two ways in which our lives are going to change qualitatively, and it started already, which I think are both very significant, and one is positive and one is negative, which is the way things ought to be, right?
Yes,
Shows that
some
at least if you
balance.
can see a positive development and a negative development, it shows you're not being too optimistic or too
Yes.
pessimistic. And the optimistic one is that it's going to accelerate our processes of collective learning, because there's going to be so much more exchange of ideas between people with different backgrounds, and that always generates new insights. And of course, the rate of innovation, technological innovation, has been increasing enormously over the last 20 years, and that rate is bound to increase with up to 10 billion people all able to connect with each other passively when they're not doing it actively. But the negative part of it is that there is so much information that we can't process it. And so it's becoming impossible to know in the midst of all this detail what is true anymore. In fact, the whole idea of truth, I can see possibly even losing its high value it's had historically, because we're never going to know what truth is. And that means there's going to be a growth of ideological interpretation based on a selection of data that suits a purpose. I think that it's the separation that we have always prided ourselves on since the beginnings of modern academic life between the pure and the applied, the pursuit of knowledge in the abstract based on a purely intellectual problem, and the pursuit of a solution to a practical problem. That is going to cease to be a difference.
Well, that only would cease to be a difference if your 2 points are completely counterbalancing each other out. If the rate of collective education or collective consciousness increases a little bit faster, or even a slight bit faster than the cacophony of information that comes out, presumably people will be smart enough to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. There was an interesting story in the New York Times today. It said that in the industrialized West since 1900, the average IQ rate has gone up by 3 points every decade.
And yet the average math score has gone down.
Well, that may be true. That may be true. But it pointed out that in 1900, the average IQ in the United States was 67, which I think today is 1 point over the minimum required level to be executed in some states in the United States. A little lower than that, I think they deem you mentally impaired. So now the average IQ is apparently 97.
So you have to be intelligent to a certain degree to
well,
be executed.
One of the criminal defenses, of course, is incapacitation, either mental or voluntary through intoxication or something. But I think even places in the deep red areas of the country have made exceptions for people who have sub
No, I know.
IQ levels. Yes.
But I wouldn't have said collective consciousness. I would have I would stick to the idea of collective learning.
Okay.
Meaning collaboration between independent minds, because I think the independence of our minds is increasing, which in itself is causing problems because we're always free to disagree with everything that's going on around us, and sometimes the disagreement gets violent.
It does, but I concur with what you're suggesting, though. I mean, people are in many ways, much more easily led now by trends. Even Twitter and Google and just about every kind of social media you have has the top 10 trending topics, the top 10 trending articles, the top 10 trending
themes. Look at the political situation as we approach the fiscal cliff, with a divided, with popular opinion completely divided within the country, and neither side is looking at all the information available, and it's very difficult for anybody, even of the stature of somebody like Bernanke, to actually summarize all the information that's available in order to arrive at a completely representative opinion about anything, and therefore the process of negotiation between opposing camps is more and more difficult.
Yes, yes. I want to just mention before we leave that I wanted to get your opinion on this. The European Union was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize
today,
early on Monday.
I heard that was going to happen, and I thought they changed their minds.
No, it was given. I mean, they were named, and I think they collectively. I don't know if the ceremony has occurred yet, but they definitely
not the ceremony, just the announcement. It must be.
And
they must have been short of candidates this year, don't you?
Well, yeah, but then I thought about it, and then you really have to remember. I mean, that the original raison d'être for this whole thing. I mean, they haven't had a war there since 1945. I mean, that's 67 years. I mean, that's pretty good.
Yes, but then there was the period from, what was it, 1815 to 1914, from Napoleon to
they had a lot of
the World War, when there were no wars in Europe. But Europe had wars outside. But
yeah, but they were at conflict with each other legally. I mean, they may not have been rummaging around the countryside with armies, but
yeah,
I think it's an incredible achievement, actually, when you think about it.
Yes, but still, the problems of how they're going to get out of the current situation without breaking up entirely.
If you think Bernanke has difficulty summarizing the American financial mess, if I see one more story about Greece on the brink, I mean, how many times is Greece going to be on the brink? It's been on the brink
keeps moving
20 times in 2 years, and there's always a penultimate meeting that will occur to decide the Greeks' fate. I mean, what do the Greeks think? I mean, I know there's been an increase in suicide rates in Greece.
The brink keeps moving, as I'm sure the edge of the fiscal cliff is going to move in a few days' time. But let me suggest something to finish up with. You know that peace studies suddenly emerged in the curriculum. I'm not sure when it first emerged, whether it was after the Second World War, but I became conscious of it in the late 60s, and I always thought that it was related to the Vietnam opposition, but I'm not sure of that. And then it became, we had a Department of Peace Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, and there were departments of peace studies in a number of other places. I think there are still many, although the one here was dissolved some time ago. But if you look on the web about peace and find out what's going on in peace studies, it's all become ideological, more and more ideological. And I think that is something that comes out of the current situation where there's too much information.
Mm-hmm.
The only way you can deal with all the information is to select according to a set of ideas that you pick up from somewhere as a way of organizing, of getting through the process of making sense of what's going on. And so we may be in beginning an age in which ideology, which of course began to be important in the way the world worked really in the middle of the 19th century, is moving into a different sort of phase where there will be much more varied ideologies, and people will tend to argue ideologically in order to have a way to make sense of the incredible amount of information available.
But you do seem to suggest that possessing an ideology is essentially the skeleton key to making one's way through this morass of information.
It's going to be the typical way that most people succumb to, and it's going to depend on people like you and me to point out that what they're doing and try to remain more open-minded about the problems of processing all the information.
Well, maybe in the next show we should have Paul McCartney and Bruce Springsteen join us, and we'll increase our viewership.
We need an introductory.
Yes. Yes. All right. Well,
okay.
Thank you very much, Professor.
See you next week.
All right. Bye.